This is a key to the worksheet on topic 5, part A, and this is the factoring worksheet, and it's called Extra 2, so that's the second extra worksheet. Okay, so in each of the following, you want to factor each of the following polynomials. All right, so let's look at number 1, and we're going to do these just by using reverse FOIL or trial and error. And so number 1, we have 3x squared minus 16x plus 5. Now remember, the easy kind is where the last sign is positive. That's the easy kind. And because that implies that the signs that we're going to put inside the two sets of parentheses, will be the same. Either they'll be both positive or both negative. And it's always going to be that middle sign. So that's the easy kind, where the last sign is positive. All right, now the first thing you have to do, though, regardless, is to always factor out the GCF. So if you look at these three terms, 3x squared, a negative 16x, and a positive 5, the GCF is 1. And so therefore, there's nothing to factor out. And so I'm going to go directly to the two binomials. All right, now, remember, we're using the idea of reverse FOIL here. So let's start with the first term. So the first term is 3x squared. All right, now in your mind you have different ideas about 3x squared. All right, so 3x squared. So there's the several possibilities. I'm trying to cover some of this up so it doesn't get in your way. So for 3x squared, if you remember, I can rewrite 3x squared as 3x times x, and that's the only possibility because 3 is prime. So whenever either the first term or the last term is prime, either the coefficient or the constant, then that's going to help you quite a bit, because there's only one possibility for 3x squared, and that's 3x times x. It does not matter where you put the 3x or the x. You can put it in the first set of parentheses or the second. All right, so that's going to, for right now, that's going to take care of f. So I'm put a little dot here. All right, now we go directly to the L, the last term. Now let's look at the fact that this right here is a positive. So that means that in my parentheses, either we're going to have both negatives or both positives, because a negative times a negative is a positive times a positive is a positive. All right. Now the other thing we got to remember, though, is that when I check the outer and the inner, I want it to be that negative 16x. So I need it to be negative. So in order for it to be negative, both of these would have to be negative, since the last sign is positive. And then for 5, there's only one possibility. There's 5 times 1. So I'm going to put either the 5 here or the 5 here, the 1 here or the 1 here. Does not matter. We're going to check. All right, so just try something. If it doesn't work, you try something else. So sometimes that's why it's called trial and error. So you hear that used as well. Okay, so let's go ahead for our purposes and put the 5 here and the 1 there. Now, the more you do, the better you can visually see which one works. All right, now this one doesn't work. All right, so that's why it's always a good idea. If you put something in there, you need to check using FOIL to make sure you get this trinomial back. And so if I go back to F now, F, 3x times x is 3x squared, so that's fine. Now let's go to L. A negative 5 times a negative 1 is a positive 5, so we're okay, good. We're good there. Now let's do the on the inner. The outer, I'm going to go ahead and write it out. The outer is a negative 3x. The inner is a negative 5x. And when I add that up, a negative 5 and a negative 3 is a negative 8, so I get a negative 8x. And that's not what I wanted. I wanted a negative 16x. So that didn't work. So then let's try something else. So let's still put the 3x here, the x here, but instead of putting the 5 with, and I remember there was two subtraction symbols, and instead of putting the 5 here, let's put the 1 here and the 5 here. All right, now let's go back and check. 3x times x is 3x squared, so my first terms look okay. My last term, let's go to the last term. The last term of each binomial, a negative 1 times a negative 5 is a positive 5, so that's good. Now let's do the outer and the inner. So the outer this time is a negative 15x. The inner is a negative 1x, and when I add them up, I get a negative 16x, and that's what you wanted. So the answer you're going to put is 3x minus 1 times x minus 5. Now again, it does not matter whether you put this factor first or not, because multiplication is commutative The order in which you multiply does not matter. Okay. All right, so that's number 1. All right, let's look at number 2. Number 2, we have this. We have 20a squared minus 9a minus 20. So 20a squared minus 9a minus 20. Now that one's going to be a little bit more challenging. First of all, the last sign's negative, so we're going to have maybe more of these to deal with in terms of trial and error. And secondly, if you look at 20, this coefficient of a squared, which is 20, and the constant, which is negative 20, these numbers are not prime. So there are several possibilities for a product of 20. So it's going to be a little bit more challenging, but hopefully within the first few tries, we will get it. All right, so first of all, notice the GCF of those three terms is 1. So the GCF is 1. So there's nothing to factor out. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and try and factor this as two binomials. And then again, we're going to use the idea of FOIL to help us. So the last sign's negative. Now remember what that means is that in order for us to get negative 20, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. So you're going to see that as we go through this. Now, so let's look at the first one, 20a squared. 20a squared. So in your mind, you're thinking this, and if you need to, you write it out somewhere on another sheet of paper. So in your mind, you're going to say, well, for 20a squared, I can use 20a times a, right? I can say 5a times 4a. I can say 10a times 2a. And that is about it. So those are the only three possibilities for 20a squared. And so what we want to try first, and it doesn't always work, but what we want to try first are the pairs that are closer together in the number line. So 5 and 4 are closer together on the number line than 21 or 10, 2. So let's try 5, 4 first. It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. So let's put the 5a here, the 4a here. And again, always make sure you're using the same variable. So if this is a's, you got to use a's. All right, now, here's what, now there are different approaches to deal with factoring this. Here's one way, and we're going to use it the same way we did the previous one. So the last sign's negative, right? So in order for that to happen, one has to be positive, one has to be negative. All right, so let's put the positive here, the negative there. It may be, when I check it, that this has to be negative, this has to be positive. Okay, so we'll see. And by the way, it may be that 5a and 4a are the ones that don't work. So we may have to try some other of these right here. Okay? All right, now let's go to 20. Now I know this is negative 20, but we've already taken care of the sign part. So let's just talk about 20 for right now. For 20, this 20 here that you see, now I want you to understand that the constant is not 20, the constant is negative 20. Okay? But I've already taken care of the signs in here, so I'm just going to put a 20 here. Okay, so again, for 20, there's 20 times 1, there's 5 times 4, and then there's 10 times 2. All right? Now, let's go ahead again, use the same idea. Let's use 5 and 4 first, since those are close together the number line. So I'm going to put, I'm going to mention this because this is sometimes helpful. I'm going to put the 4 here and the 5 here. All right, now here's what I'm going to say about it. This is not correct because watch. Here's what I'm going to say about this. One of the things you always have to be careful of is that your factors the GCF is 1. So if you look at 5a and 5, the GCF is not 1. That means I can factor out a 5. You see that? Because that's 5 times a plus 1. If that's the case, if you can factor out a 5 from these, then that means you could have factored out a 5 from the 3 terms here. And you know you can't because 5 does not go into 9 evenly. So you know you cannot put the 5 here. The same thing here. If you put the 4 here, then that means you can factor out a 4, which means that you could have factored out a 4 from all of these, and that's not true because we know the GCF is 1. So I know that if I use 5 and 4, I cannot put the 5 here, and I cannot put the 4 here because I can factor it out further. And I know I cannot do that because the GCF is 1. So that means then is that I'm going to go ahead and rewrite the original that I had. I had this. Okay, so that means then is that instead of putting the 5 here, let's put the 4 here and the 5 here. And I'm good at this point because the GCF here is 1, the GCF here is 1. Now all I got to do though is check FOIL to make sure I get this trinomial back. All right, so let's try it. So 5a times 4a is 20a squared. So I'm good at that point. So the F part of FOIL is okay. Let's do the last. A positive 4 times a negative 5 is a negative 20. And that's what y'all wanted. So far my L is okay. My last is okay. Now that's where now you got to do the out and the inner. Always do the out and the inner last. So the 5a times negative 5 is negative 25a. 4a times 4 is 16a. But when I add them up, I get I get negative 9a, right? Okay, so what that means is that if you look at what you have, that's correct. So right away, in my second try, I got the right answer because this was my first, it's my second. So that's correct. And so therefore, so this out in the inner is correct. And so therefore the answer is going to be 5a plus 4 times 4a minus 5. Okay, so that's the answer. All right, so that's number 2. Let's look at number 3. Number 3, we have 7x squared plus 6x plus 5. All right. Now that's going to be the easy one because of this 5 because of this plus symbol. The last sign is positive, and also 7 and 5 are primes. That's the easy kind. That's always the easy kind. Now I want you to know though the GCF is 1. So the GCF is 1. All right, now let's go factoring it as 2 binomials. All right, so there's only one in terms of FOIL. We're going to use the idea of FOIL, trial and error. So for 7x squared, there's only one possibility. There's 7x times x. Okay, so that takes care of my F. Let's talk about the L. Now notice this is positive, so that means these signs in here are the same, and they're going to be that middle sign. So if I want the outer and the inner to add up to a positive 6x, that means both of these has to be positive. And now for 5, there's only one possibility, 5 and 1. So let's put the 5 here, the 1 there. That doesn't work, we'll switch them. So that takes care of the out. Now all I got to do now is check the out and the inner. So look at the outer. The outer is 7x. The inner is 5x. When I add them up, I get 12x. That's not what I wanted. So then let's switch the 5 and the 1. All right, let's see what happens. So if I switch the 5 and the 1, so 7x plus 1 and then x plus 5. So it's if I switch the 5 and the 1, and I check the out and the inner, that's 35x, and that's 1x, and that's 36x. So that didn't work either. And I've exhausted all possibilities because those are prime numbers. And so therefore we say that this cannot be factored. So the answer you're going to write is prime. That's what you're going to write. Okay, number 4. Number 4, we have 30s squared plus 19s minus 63. So 30s squared plus 19s minus 63. All right, so this one's a little bit challenging as well because this is not prime and 63 is not prime, and also we have a negative for the last sign. Now I want to mention this as well because we hadn't had that situation at this point in this worksheet because I did make sure that it was in descending order. Okay, so always make sure it's in descending order. So you have your x squared first, you have your s term next, and then you have your constant listed last. All right, now the GCF is 1. So the GCF of all those terms is 1. So now I'm going to go directly to the 2 binomials. Factor as 2 binomials. And I'm going to use the idea of FOIL. So for 30s squared, and it's a good idea for some of you, now not all of you need to do this, but some of you may. So some of you may need to write out, well, what are the factors of 30s squared? Well, there's 5s times 6s, right? There is 15s times 2s. There is 10s times 3s. There is 30s times s. So all of those products will give me 30s squared. And so these pairs here that you see, these pairs of factors will go in my first terms of each binomial. Now again, you always want to try. It doesn't always work out, but you always want to try the ones that are close together on the number line. So 5 and 6 are close together than any of these other pairs. So let's try 5 and 6. So let's put 5s here, 6s here. It does not matter. You could put the 6x here, 6s here if you wanted to. All right, well, what you notice, though, is that that last sign's negative. So that means that one's positive, one's negative. Okay? All right, now, so let's put the positive here, the negative there. It doesn't work, we'll switch them. So trial and error. Now let's look at 63. Now, again, remember the constant is not a 63. The constant is a negative 63. Keep that in mind, but I've already taken care of the sign part. So let's talk about 63 for right now. For 63, there are several possibilities. There is 3 times, 21, okay? There is 7 times 9. There is 21 times 1. And then there is, I think that's it. So those should be the only possibilities for 63. Okay, and so let's try the ones close together in the number line. So let's try this pair first. So let's put the I'm gonna ask you this. So I want you to think about this, and this is important. See, that's a 9 here, right? Would you put the 9 here? Is it a good idea to put the 9 here? Or are you going to waste your time putting the 9 here? The answer is no. Okay, so I want you to remember what we talked about earlier. So when we talked about, if I can quickly go to it, when we talked about this right here, remember when we put the 5 here, we notice I could factor out a 5, and that would mean that all of these terms are divisible by 5, and it's not, because this middle term isn't. Also, the Gcf is 1. So the Gcf is 1, how can you factor out a 5 from all of these? Okay, so the same thing here. I want you to notice, if you put a 9 here, let me go ahead and just kind of do it right here just to show you. So I'm going to take this right here. So if I put 6s minus 9, then that means I can factor out a 3. And because that's 2s minus 3, right? So you can factor out a 3, which would mean that those 3 terms are divisible by 3, and 19 is not divisible by 3. The Gcf is 1. Okay, so since the Gcf is 1, there's no other common factor in those 3 terms. So if you factor out a 3, then that means that all these 3 terms have a common factor of 3. Now, 2 of them do. This has a common factor of 3, because that's 10 times 3. This does, because that's 3 times 21, but this does not. So don't waste your time. Don't waste your time in putting the 9 with the 6s. So let's put the 9 with the 5s, because now you know the Gcf is 1 here. So we're good so far, because that's what our Gcf said. And then let's put the 7 here. Okay? All right, now let's check. So let's do the F first. 5s times 6s is 30s squared. So I'm good. Let's go to the last. A positive 9 times a negative 7 is a negative 63. So I'm good. Now let's do the outer and the inner. The outer is a negative 35s. The inner is a positive 54s. And when you add them up, and if you have to use your calculator, use your calculator. So when you add them up, you have 54 minus 35 gives us 16. And notice this was, 54 minus 35 gives us 19. And notice this is what we wanted, right? So that gives us a positive 19s. And right off, I got the answer. So if you had put a negative here and a positive here, I want to show you what you would do. Okay, so just in case you did this. Suppose you said 5s minus and then 6s plus instead. So remember how we said we knew that the last sign is negative, so one of these is positive, one of these is negative. Someone else could have said negative positive at that point. And so you would have gotten 9 and 7. All right, so if I check the outer and the inner, notice the outer is a positive 35s, the inner is a negative 54s. And so when I add them up, I get a negative 19s. Okay, so I want you to remember this now. We talked about this in our lessons. A negative 19s is what I have. This is what I wanted. So those are opposites. Since those are opposites, all I need to do is change the sign. So all I would do to make it right is I would come in here, and I wouldn't do it on this part, I'd rewrite it, but I would come back and make this a positive and this a negative, and that's what it was. Okay, so this, remember, all this would implies change the signs. Okay, and then so the answer for our problem here, let me put the answer here. So the answer would be this right here. So it'd be 5s plus 9 times 6s minus 7. Okay? All right. Okay, now let's look at number 5. Number 5, we have this in number 5. So we have 9x squared plus 18x plus 8. All right. So this is not a difficult one either, because the last sign's positive. Although 9 and 8 are not prime, it's not, there aren't that many factors of those. So it's manageable. But again, the GCF of all those three terms is 1. So we're going to go directly to the two binomials. And so let's talk about I remember using the idea of FOIL. So let's do the F first. So for 9x squared, there's 9x times x, and there's 3x times 3x. All right? So let's try, and those are the only possibilities. So let's try 3x and 3x first. So let's put 3x here, 3x here. Doesn't always work. It may be that the 9x and the x works. That's why you check your work in the end. And so the last sign's positive, so that means these signs are the same, so both can be that middle sign, so they're both going to be positive. And let's talk about 8. So there's only two possibilities for 8. There's 2 times 4, and there's 8 times 1. So let's try 2 times 4 first. So it does not matter. It does not matter where you put the 2. Y'all see why? Because the first terms are the same. It doesn't matter. So let's put the 2 here, the 4 here, or you could put the 4 here, 2 here. It does not matter, because these first terms are the same. So it does not matter. Now let's check. Always check. You got to make sure you get this trinomial back. So 3x times 3x is 9x squared, so I'm good at this point. The last, a positive 2 times a positive 4 is a positive 8, so my L is okay. Now let's check the outer and the inner. The outer is 12x, the inner is 6x, and when I add them up, I get 18x, and that's what you wanted. So the answer will be 3x plus 2 times 3x plus 4, or remember, multiplication is commutative, so some of you may have instead 3x plus 4 times 3x plus 2. All right, so that's number 5. Okay, number 6, you have 12y squared minus 17y plus 6. All right, now again, notice the GCF is 1. The GCF is 1. And so we can go directly to those two binomials. All right, now again, this is going to be the easy kind because the last sign's positive, so that's always the easy kind. Now for 12, there's a little bit more possibilities than 2 pairs, but it's still doable. And for 6, that's a nice number as well. So let's talk about 12y squared. There is 4y times 3y. There is 6y times 2y, and there's 12y times y. Okay. Let's go ahead and try this pair first, the one close together in the number line, in terms of these coefficients, 4 and 3. So let's put the 4y here, the 3y here. And again, if 4y and 3y don't work, it may be that 6y and 2y works. So some of you, depending on your thought processes and depending on how much you've been practicing, may take a little bit longer to get the answer. Some of you may be able to look at this right away and say, oh, I know the answer right away, write it out, check it, you're good. Some of you may take maybe the 3 tries before you get the right answer. It depends on your thought processes and how much you've been practicing with this and how much you understand the idea of the FOIL method and how it relates to the idea of factoring. Okay, so the last sign's positive, so that means these signs in here are the same and they're both going to be negative because a negative times a negative is a positive. Now let's talk about 6. For 6, there are 2 possibilities for 6. There's 6 times 1, 3 times 2. Okay, so let's try, and I'll make this wrong because some of you may, so I'm going to do a wrong one here. So let's say someone wanted to try 6 and 1. All right, now remember, it's always a good idea to try the ones close together in the number line first. All right, but let's say someone wants to try 6 and 1. I'm going to ask you this. Are you going to put the 6 here? The answer is no, because you could factor out at 3, and you know you cannot factor out at 3 because that would mean that you could have factored out at 3 from all these, and 17 is not divisible by 3. So you know if you're gonna use 6 and 1, then you better put the 6 here and the 1 there, and you know you can't do that either. Why? Because you could factor out a 2 from here. See that? So you know that 6 and 1 cannot work. So right away you could say, well, I couldn't use 6 and 1 anyway, right? You cannot use 6 and 1 anyway because no matter where you put the 6, either here or put the 6 here, you could still factor out something. I can factor out a 2 here, and here I can factor out a 3, and I know I cannot do that because the GCF is 1. So right away, we can throw away the pair 6 and 1. See that? All right, so that's why it's always a good idea before you even waste your time putting all this stuff in and checking that you think about, well, does it really make sense to even try 6 and 1? And the answer is no, because if I put 6 here or 6 here, I can factor out something and I know that the GCF is 1, so that's not possible. Okay? So then that only leaves us this. All right, so let's rewrite our original. So remember the original we thought about was this. So we're going to try 4y and 3y. They're both going to be negative subtraction symbols. All right, now let's talk about 3 and 2. I'm going to ask you this. Let's talk about 3. Let's talk about 3 and 2. Where do you think you're going to put the 3? Are you going to put the 3 here? No, because if you put the 3 here, that means you can factor out a 3, right? And again, if you put the 3 here and put the 2 here, on here you could factor out a 2. So you know that 3 cannot go here. So that means 2 has to go here and 3 has to go here. So always think about that GCF that you dealt with earlier. So if you look at these two terms, the GCF is 1. If you look at these two terms, the GCF is 1. See, this one, the GCF was 3. Here, the GCF was 2. So whenever you can factor things further out, that means that you could have done it in the beginning. But remember, the GCF is 1. Now, all we have to do is check to make sure what we have looks good. So 4y times 3y is 12y squared. So in terms of FOIL, my F is okay. The last, a negative 3 times a negative 2 is a positive 6. So in terms of L, I'm okay. Let's try the out and the inner. The outer, 4y times negative 2 is a negative 8y. The inner, negative 3 times 3y is a negative 9y. And when I add them up, I do get negative 17y, and that's what you wanted. So the answer will be 4y minus 3 times 3y minus 2. Or if you wanted to, you could have put 3y minus 2 first. 3y minus 2 times 4y minus 3. Does not matter. Okay, let's look at number 7. Number 7, we have, this is number 7. All right, number 7, we have 6a squared minus 11ab minus 2b squared. All right, so that's where we're going to have two variables. So you got to make sure, that when you do your binomials, you have the variables a and b involved. See over here, in all the others, there was only one variable, either variable y or variable x. So in the binomials, when you look at the answers, each factor had just one term with the x. See, the 2 did not have an x, the 4 did not have an x. All right, so always keep that in mind. You have one variable here. Here you have two variables to deal with. All right, but I want you to notice, though, the GCF of those three terms is 1. Okay, always keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and factor this. And we're going to do the factoring just like we did before. Same idea. Again, notice the last sign's negative, so these signs are going to be different. All right, let's talk about 6a squared. There are two possibilities for 6a squared. There's 3a times 2a, and there's 6a times a, right? Okay, so let's try the 3 and the 2a first. If that doesn't work, it may be the 6a and the a that works. So we have 3a, 2a. The last sign's negative. So let's put the positive here, the negative there. If that doesn't work, we'll switch them. All right, now let's talk about 2b squared. For 2b squared, we have 2b times b. That's the only possibility because 2 is prime. So I'm going to ask you this. Are you going to put the 2b here? So I want you to think about it. If you put the 2b here, remember our discussion. If you put the 2b with the 2a, that means you could factor out a 2 because they both have 2's in common. But you can't because the GCF is 1. So that, see, if you could factor out a 2 here, then that means you could have factored out a 2 at the beginning. And 11 is not divisible by 2. Okay? And so I know that I'm going to have to put the 2b here and the b here. All right, now, again, before you stop, you need to check to make sure you get this back using FOIL. So 3a times 2a is 6a squared, so I'm good with the F. The last, a positive 2b times the negative b is a negative 2b squared. I'm good with the L. All right, let's talk about the out and the inner. The outer, 3a times negative b is a negative 3ab. Okay? And then 2b times 2a is 2ab. But when I add them up, I want you to notice something. That I get a negative ab. I get a negative ab, but I wanted a negative 11ab. So that didn't work. And then you may, and remember, you may say, well, let's switch the 2b and the b. Well, you can't either because we just talked about that. So then that means then is that here's a situation where choosing the ones close together number line did not work. So that means then is that since I've exhausted all possibilities for 2b squared, then we got to switch this. We got to use this instead. So now let's use 6a and a instead. And let's put the plus here, the minus there, and see what happens. And it may be that this might be minus, this may be the plus one right there. All right, now let's talk about 2b and b. So where are you going to put the 2b and the b? Are you going to put the 2b here? You better say no, because if you put the 2b here, that means you can factor out a 2. So you have to put the 2b here and the b there. Because now if you look at each of those factors, the GCF is 1 here, and the GCF is 1 here, and your GCF at the beginning was 1. Okay? All right, now you got to check. 6a times a is 6a squared. So my F is okay. So in terms of F, in terms of FOIL, my F is okay. Let's go to the last. A positive b times a negative b is a negative 2b squared. So I'm good there. All right, let's talk about the out and the inner. The outer, 6a times a negative 2b is a negative 12ab. A positive b times a is a positive ab, and when I add them up, a positive 1 and a negative 12 is a negative 11, so I get a negative 11ab, and that's what you wanted. So the answer is 6a plus b times a minus 2b. So that's the answer for that one. Okay. Number 8, we have 20x squared plus 37xy plus 15y squared. So 20x squared plus 37xy plus 15x squared. Okay, again, we have two variables. So just like number 7, we had two variables involved. And notice how our binomials had both variables in them. Okay. Same thing here. So the last sign's positive, so that's going to be an easy one. Notice, though, the GCF of those three terms is 1. And so when I factor this, the possibilities for 20x squared are 5x times 4x, 10x times 2x, 20x times x, and 5. Oh, we already did the 5, and I think that's it. Okay, so let's try 5x and 4x first. So let's put the 5x here, the 4x here, and it doesn't matter. You can put 4x or 5x. It does not matter. The last sign's positive. That means these signs in here are the same. They're going to be the middle sign. They're both going to be plus symbols. All right, now let's talk about 15y squared. So for 15y squared, I have 3y times 5y, and I have 15y times y. So let's try 3y and 5y first. If you try 3y and 5y first, are you going to put the 5y here? The answer is no, because then that means you would be able to factor out a 5, and 37 is not divisible by 5. And remember, the GCF is 1. So you have to put the 5y here. Let's make sure you say 5y now. And you have to put the 3y here. All right, let's check. Check the idea of FOIL. All right, so for f, 5x times 4x is 20x squared, so the f is okay. Let's go to the L. 3y times 5y is 15y squared, so that's good. Now let's do the on the inner. The outer, 5x times 5y is 25xy. The inner, 3y times 4x is a 12xy. And when I add them up, I get 37xy, and that's what you wanted. So we're good. So the answer is 5x plus 3y times 4x plus 5y. Or you could say 4x plus 5y times 5x plus 3y. All right. That's number 9. Number 9, we have 14c squared minus 33ct plus 18t squared. Okay. Now again, the GCF is 1 of all those terms. The GCF is 1. So we're going to go directly to our two binomials. And remember, we are using the idea of FOIL, reverse FOIL, trial and error, to factor this. And for 14t squared, oh, and by the way, the last sign is positive. This means these signs in here are the same. They're going to be that middle sign. So keep that in mind. But for 14c squared, we can say 7c times 2c, and then 14c times c. So let's try the 7c and the 2c first. So let's put 7c here, 2c here. And again, the last sign is positive, so these signs in here are different. So the same, so they're both negative. Now let's talk about 18t squared. For 18t squared, there is 6t times 3t. There is 9t times 2t. There is 18t times t. Those are the only possibilities for that. So let's do the one close together number line first, the 6t and the 3t. All right, now make things easy on yourself. Let's talk about that, the 6t and the 3t's. Is it a good idea to put the 6t here? No, because if you put the 6t with the 2c, I want you to think about this. You got to think about what you're doing. If you put the 6t with the 2c, that means you can factor out a 2. But the GCF is 1, so it's not possible. So you cannot do that. So that means that the 6t, you're going to have to put with the 7c. And then the 2c, I'm sorry. Well, you couldn't. I'm looking at the wrong one. Excuse me. Then the 3t, you have to put here. Okay? And then notice that in both cases, now the GCF is 1 for that one, and the GCF is 1 here for that one. Okay? All right. Now let's check. I'm checking FOIL. So 7c times 2c is 14c squared. So my f is okay. A negative 6t times a negative 3t is a positive 18t squared. So I'm good there. Now let's do the on the inner. The outer 7c times a negative 3t is a negative 21ct. The inner, a negative 6t and a negative 2c is a negative 12ct. And when I add them up, a negative 12 and a negative 21 is a negative 33, and I get negative 33ct, and that's what you wanted. So the answer is 7c minus 6t times 2c minus 3t, or you could have written it the other way. 2c minus 3t times 7c minus 6t. All right? And then number 10, we have 25q squared minus 40qr plus 16r squared. Okay, so again, if you look at those three terms, the GCF is 1. So we're going to go directly to those two binomials. And this is an easy one because the last sign's positive, so it's always a good one. Now for 25, that's not bad either, because I want you to notice something. For 25q squared, you have 5q times 5q, and then 25q times q. So let's always try the ones close together in the number line. So let's use the 5q's. So 5q, 5q. The last sign's positive, they have to both be negative. So subtract, subtract. For 16r squared, I have 4r times 4r, 8r times 2r, 16r times r, and that's about it. All right, so what do you want to try first? All right, you want to try the 4r, 4r? Okay, so let's do that. 4r, 4r. And let's check it. Remember, checking FOIL. So for F, 5q times 5q is 25q squared, so I'm good. The last, a negative 4r times a negative 4 is a 16r squared, I'm good. Let's do the inner. The outer, 5q times negative 4r is a negative 20 rq, or qr, doesn't matter. And then here, a negative 4r times 5q is a negative 20 rq. And when I add them up, I get a negative 40 rq, which is what I wanted. It's just written as qr. All right. And so what I have here is correct. So the answer then will be 5q minus 4r times 5q minus 4r. Notice the factors are the same. So if you wanted to, you could have said 5q minus 4r squared. Now, we're going to learn in another lesson something like this. So this right here, see how you were able to go from this trinomial to a binomial squared, where the factors are the same? This trinomial is called a perfect square trinomial. You're going to learn about that later on. But I'm just going to go ahead and write it out. So this is called a perfect square trinomial. So a perfect square trinomial is a trinomial in which you could factor as a binomial square. Okay? All right, and there's some properties about a perfect square trinomial, something about how the factors look that you can see without factoring it, whether it will be a perfect square trinomial. And so that's going to be in a later section. Okay, but at any rate, that's going to take care of the key to this worksheet. So that's the key to the worksheet on topic 5, part 8.